Lascaux. Let's talk about the deeply unsettling subterranean galleries hidden beneath the forests of southwestern France. This sprawling, pitch-black labyrinth was violently hollowed out by ancient, catastrophic floods that tore through the dense limestone bedrock, creating a massive, terrifying void beneath the earth. Thousands of years ago, mysterious and brutal climate shifts, relentless ice storms, and sudden, violent thaws forced ancient societies underground to seek shelter from the freezing elements. Unfortunately, sudden, massive geological rockfalls permanently trapped entire tribes in the dark, wiping them out completely in absolute, suffocating isolation. When you shine a flickering light on the walls today, the sheer scale is immediately overwhelming and deeply unsettling. The famous Hall of the Bulls features animal figures so massive, a single painted aurochs is roughly the size of a standard family minivan. These towering silhouettes are meticulously painted in deep, blood-red ochre and pitch-black charcoal, dominating the space. The texture of the rock is aggressively jagged, completely covered in a glittering layer of calcite that makes the beasts look as though they are actively sweating under your flashlight. Surprisingly, the power is its insidious atmospheric preservation and control. It possesses staggering endurance, perfectly regulating its own internal temperature and humidity for over 17,000 years without a single failure. The cave actively fights off decay by completely manipulating the surrounding air. At first glance, the danger seems incredibly mild. Getting trapped inside feels a bit like stepping into a stuffy, unventilated high school locker room after a long game. You might just feel a slight tickle in your throat and a bit of stagnant warmth. But what it actually does to humans is horrifying. The cave is heavily saturated with trapped carbon dioxide and ancient, dormant fungal spores that slowly and methodically starve your brain of vital oxygen. Here is exactly how it inflicts its fatal damage upon intruders. The heavy, invisible carbon dioxide waits patiently in the lower depressions of the uneven floor. As you walk, your boots stir it up, and the toxic cloud suddenly ambushes your lungs from the bottom up. Aggressive black mold spores spot a new host in the warm dampness of your breath and aggressively attack your soft respiratory tissue. The invisible gas chases the oxygen right out of your bloodstream, leaving you completely powerless. Human bodies endure violent coughing fits, extreme, terrifying hallucinations of the painted beasts charging, and eventual asphyxiation as the cave viciously defends its prehistoric art from outsiders. One final fact that completely turns everything upside down is that the paintings themselves seem to biologically trigger the cave's immune system. Whenever modern humans exhale too much carbon dioxide, aggressive black fungus literally blooms directly over the painted animals, meaning the cave is actively trying to kill the audience to ensure its artwork remains forever unseen. If you think suffocating in the dark caves of France is a total nightmare, wait until you see the crushing, highly unstable ceilings waiting for you in Spain. 2. Altamira. Let's talk about the collapsing, suffocating chambers buried beneath the lush, deceptively tranquil meadows of Cantabria, Spain. This treacherous site was formed through violent tectonic shifts that literally tore the bedrock apart, creating deep, highly unstable voids beneath the surface. Long ago, catastrophic and sudden rock slides completely wiped out the ancient societies that dared to camp near its entrance, crushing entire communities under thousands of tons of falling limestone without a single second of warning. When you look up into the cavernous darkness, the sheer scale of the danger immediately hits you. The famous painted bison are not drawn on flat surfaces. They are painted onto massive, bulging rock nodules. Each of these hanging rocky protrusions is about the size of a heavy porcelain bathtub, dangling precariously right over your fragile head. The colors drip with heavy hematite reds and shadowy, charcoal blacks that seem to absorb your light. The texture is horrifyingly uneven, covered in sharp, jagged stalactites that look exactly like rows of prehistoric teeth waiting to snap shut on you. Surprisingly, the power is its terrifying gravitational instability. It possesses a frightening endurance, holding thousands of tons of fractured rock in a fragile, suspended state of tension for millennia. It is an absolute master of suspended kinetic energy, essentially acting as a massively loaded spring. To a modern human, the danger might initially feel completely mild and harmless. It feels a lot like standing under a slightly leaky roof during a gentle spring rain, with only tiny, harmless pebbles occasionally dropping onto your hard hat. But what it actually does is far more lethal and deceptive. The cave creates a false sense of absolute security while invisible microfractures rapidly spiderweb across the ceiling directly overhead, quietly preparing to unleash a localized meteor shower of razor-sharp stone. Here is exactly how it executes its deadly design. The cavern waits for multiple interlopers to gather closely beneath its most beautiful and vibrant paintings. It subtly spots the acoustic vibrations from their heavy footsteps and the thermal expansion from their body heat. Then, the ceiling violently attacks. Massive, bathtub-sized boulders chase the panicking intruders toward the exit, crashing down in a terrifying, ground-shaking domino effect. Humans caught in the sudden collapse endure catastrophic blunt force trauma, permanently pinned to the cold floor by the very art they traveled so far to admire. One final fact that completely turns everything upside down is that the porous limestone rock naturally absorbs the high-frequency sound of the cracking ceiling. This means it acoustically cloaks its own deadly avalanches. You will never hear the devastating collapse coming until the rocks are already shattering against your skull. While falling ceilings are an incredibly brutal way to meet your end, the next location uses predatory shadows and acoustic manipulation to drive you completely out of your mind. 3. Chauvet. Let's talk about the permanently sealed, toxic vault hidden deep within the treacherous Ardèche Valley of southern France. This sprawling network of terrifying galleries was formed when a massive, underground river violently boiled and carved through the limestone, leaving behind highly toxic mineral deposits. Roughly 29,000 years ago, a catastrophic, localized seismic event caused the massive cliff face above to shear off entirely. The resulting avalanche permanently sealed the only cave entrance, instantly entombing ancient societies inside to die a slow, agonizing death in the pitch black without a single drop of water. The sheer size of this underground psychological trap is genuinely hard to comprehend. The painted panels stretch infinitely across the curving walls, with the famous panel of lions measuring about the same length as a full-size city bus. The cave walls are heavily coated in a haunting, pale white limestone dust, making the dark, charcoal predator drawings pop with a terrifying, three-dimensional effect. The texture is incredibly chalky and abrasive, and the predators painted here, cave bears, panthers, and rhinos, are violently layered over each other in a way that makes them look like a chaotic, moving stampede. Surprisingly, the power is its masterful psychological manipulation and sensory deprivation. Its power of endurance is matched only by its ability to completely warp human perception over time. The cave naturally amplifies low-frequency sounds, creating an acoustic environment that directly mimics the heavy, predatory growls of the ancient beasts painted on its walls. The initial danger feels incredibly mild to the unsuspecting explorer. It starts off feeling exactly like you have just put on a pair of expensive noise-canceling headphones that are slightly malfunctioning with a faint, static hum. But what it actually does is severely scramble your inner ear and entirely short-circuit your brain's fear centers. The unique, curving shape of the cavern acts as a massive parabolic reflector for infrasound, sound waves so low you cannot hear them, but you feel them vibrating deeply in your chest, triggering overwhelming dread and severe vertigo. Here is exactly how the cave causes its psychological damage. The dark, twisting corridors wait patiently until you are completely disoriented and separated from the entrance. The heavy, vibrating air suddenly ambushes your nervous system. Shadows cast from your flickering flashlights seem to aggressively chase you across the jagged walls. The cave attacks your fragile mind. Humans endure intense waves of nausea, complete spatial disorientation, and terrifying paranoid delusions, eventually dropping their light sources and running wildly into the razor-sharp rocks in the absolute dark. One final fact that completely turns everything upside down is that the painted lions are deliberately drawn by the ancients with multiple, overlapping sets of legs. Under a flickering torch, this creates a highly primitive strobe light animation, literally hypnotizing the viewer into a state of frozen paralysis before the ultimate panic sets in. If you find phantom animated predators terrifying, just wait until you meet the hundreds of disembodied, toxic hands desperately waiting to drag you down in South America. 4. Cueva de las Manos. Let's talk about the highly isolated, wind-scoured rock shelters carved deeply into the desolate, unforgiving canyons of Patagonia, Argentina. This deep, jagged valley was ripped open violently by colossal glacial retreats, leaving behind towering, sheer cliffs of brittle volcanic rock. Thousands of years ago, devastating megadroughts and localized, choking volcanic ash storms wiped out the ancient hunter-gatherer societies that desperately clung to these steep canyon walls. The tribes completely vanished into the dust, leaving behind nothing but frantic, overlapping handprints pressed against the stone as they choked to death on microscopic silica. When you walk up to the baking rock face, the scale is incredibly unsettling and vast. There are well over 800 overlapping handprints stenciled directly onto the rock, covering a massive surface area roughly the size of a giant commercial billboard. The colors are visually jarring, sickly yellows, deep blood reds, pitch blacks, and ghostly bone whites. The texture of the wall is sharp, heavily flaking, and blistering under the harsh, relentless Patagonian sun. Surprisingly, the power is its incredibly resilient microscopic toxicity. The endurance of the ancient pigments is highly unnatural, surviving millennia of harsh, abrasive desert winds without fading. But its true superpower is what those bright pigments are actually made of: highly concentrated, completely unrefined toxic minerals that never lose their lethal, poisoning potency. At first, the danger seems incredibly mild and entirely forgettable. Touching the dusty, colorful wall feels absolutely no different than getting a little bit of dry chalk on your fingers from a standard classroom blackboard. But what it actually does to humans is horrific and slow. The ancient, vibrant paint is heavily loaded with lethal heavy metals like raw arsenic and concentrated iron oxide. Here is how the shelter actively inflicts its devastating damage on your body. The toxic, dried dust waits patiently for a strong gust of canyon wind. It suddenly ambushes your exposed skin, your eyes, and your open respiratory system. The microscopic heavy metal particles aggressively attack your bloodstream directly through the soft, vulnerable tissues deep inside your lungs. It doesn't just poison you, it actively chases the vital oxygen right out of your blood cells. Humans endure violent, painful skin blistering, intense neurological tremors, and severe heavy metal poisoning that slowly and painfully shuts down their major internal organs over a matter of agonizing days. One final fact that completely turns everything upside down is that the hundreds of painted hands are almost entirely left hands. This grim detail implies the ancient painters were holding the toxic pigment pipes in their right hands, literally blowing pure poison directly over their own skin, willingly absorbing the lethal heavy metal toxins just to leave their desperate mark on the deadly canyon wall. You might think inhaling highly toxic paint is a terrible way to perish, but the next location uses the brutal, baking heat of the sun to turn an entire painted mountain into a giant, inescapable oven. Before we continue, it is time for our mid-video subscriber challenge. I will be announcing a secret question to be revealed at the end of the video. Only those who watch the entire video will know the answer. The first correct comment will be featured in the next video. I also want to congratulate the winner of the previous video, Chris Miller. Now let's turn up the heat. 5. Bhimbetka. Let's talk about the massive, sun-scorched rock shelters violently jutting out of the dense Vindhya range in central India. These imposing, monolithic sandstone formations were violently pushed upward by massive tectonic collisions, creating a chaotic labyrinth of natural stone fortresses. In the distant past, catastrophic, relentless monsoons followed immediately by decades of blistering, apocalyptic heat waves completely wiped out the ancient societies inhabiting them. The massive, towering sandstone blocks essentially became giant, solar-powered kilns, baking the ancient tribes alive as the surrounding dense forests completely burned to ash. When you stand directly inside one of these natural shelters, the sheer size is entirely crushing. The massive overhanging rocks are roughly the size of a 5-story office building, leaning precariously and heavily right over your head. The ancient paintings themselves are a chaotic, swirling blur of dark red and stark white, depicting massive, aggressive boars and frantic wild hunts. The texture of the rock is incredibly rough, feeling exactly like coarse grit sandpaper, and it actively radiates an intense, deeply uncomfortable heat against your skin. Surprisingly, the power is its extreme, unnatural thermal retention. Its endurance against the harsh elements is staggering, but its true superpower is its terrifying ability to absorb, safely store, and exponentially multiply solar radiation. The rocky shelter acts exactly like a massive thermal battery, heavily trapping heat inside its concave, oven-like shape. The danger is heavily toned down at first, tricking your senses. Walking inside the deep shade feels like stepping into a slightly overly warm greenhouse on a lazy summer afternoon. You might just break a mild, comfortable sweat. But what it actually does to the human body is scientifically brutal. The concentrated radiant heat quietly initiates severe, unstoppable hyperthermia, literally boiling your body's vital water reserves from the inside out, while the stagnant, superheated air completely stops your sweat from evaporating. Here is exactly how the rocks cause their fatal damage. The intense thermal radiation waits quietly for you to walk deep into the darkest shade, completely tricking you into feeling safe and cool. Then, the trapped ambient heat violently ambushes your core internal temperature. The superheated stone actively attacks your fragile hydration levels. Severe dehydration quickly chases away your physical strength, causing your major muscles to instantly cramp and lock up. Humans endure massive, debilitating heat stroke, terrifying, fever-induced hallucinations of the painted boars actively coming to life on the walls, and eventual, total cardiac collapse as their internal temperature violently exceeds fatal limits. One final fact that completely turns everything upside down is that the dark red pigment heavily smeared on the walls actually becomes significantly brighter and much more vivid as the ambient temperature dangerously rises. The cave art literally feeds on the lethal, baking heat, glowing vibrantly and brightly right as the extreme heatstroke finally takes your life. If you absolutely hate the blistering, baking heat of the sun, you are going to deeply despise the bat-infested, highly toxic slime pits waiting for you in Bulgaria. 6. Megara. Let's talk about the incredibly damp, constantly echoing, and terrifyingly deep cavern located in the jagged limestone mountains of northwestern Bulgaria. This vast subterranean nightmare was aggressively carved out by relentless, highly acidic subterranean rivers that violently dissolved the dense rock over millions of years. Thousands of years ago, catastrophic, massive sinkholes and sudden, violent underground flooding completely trapped ancient societies deep inside the lower, inescapable chambers. The freezing water rose rapidly, drowning the prehistoric tribes in absolute darkness and permanently burying their fragile bones beneath incredibly thick, suffocating layers of slippery, highly toxic bat guano. When you carefully descend into the massive main gallery, the sheer scale is genuinely nauseating. The central viewing hall is so incredibly vast, you could easily fit a massive commercial Boeing 747 airplane inside it with plenty of room to spare. The walls are thickly smeared with a foul, dark brown, deeply unsettling substance. Unlike other beautiful caves that use colorful ochre, these specific paintings were drawn entirely with highly infectious, fossilized bat feces. The texture of the walls is incredibly slick, slimy, and highly porous, reflecting the weak light of your torch in a sickly, wet, terrifying gleam. Surprisingly, the power is its hyper-accelerated, unstoppable biological corruption. The cave has an extreme, terrifying endurance when it comes to breeding microscopic horrors in the dark. Its true superpower is the rapid, highly aggressive cultivation of deadly, flesh-eating bacteria and weaponized fungal spores that absolutely thrive in the massive, rotting mounds of ancient guano. To a modern human, the creeping danger feels like a minor, easily ignored inconvenience. It simply smells a bit like a dirty, uncleaned hamster cage, and the air just feels a little thick, heavy, and unusually humid. But what it actually does is entirely insidious and highly lethal. The cave is an active, biological hot zone. The invisible spores suspended in the air cause extreme, weaponized histoplasmosis, a brutal fungal infection that rapidly liquefies soft lung tissue and spreads aggressive, unstoppable decay throughout the central nervous system. This is how the cave actively inflicts its gruesome damage. The invisible, highly infectious fungal spores wait patiently in the damp, swirling air currents. As you inevitably slip on the slick, treacherous floor, you aggressively disturb the toxic dust, and the bacteria quickly ambush your open pores and completely exposed respiratory tract. The aggressive infection violently attacks your immune system within mere minutes of exposure. The microscopic horrors rapidly chase the healthy, living cells deep in your lungs, multiplying at a terrifying speed. Humans severely endure violent, bloody coughing fits, extreme, brain-boiling fevers, and creeping, painful necrosis as their flesh literally rots away while they are still desperately breathing the foul air. One final fact that completely turns everything upside down is that the rotting bat guano paintings actually emit a faint, highly eerie bioluminescent glow in complete, absolute darkness. The deadly, thriving bacteria feeding heavily on the ancient paint actively light up the horrifying, chaotic fertility dances drawn on the walls, purposely luring you deeper into the most toxic, deadly air in the entire cavern. Flesh-eating fungal caves are unarguably brutal, but they simply do not compare to the venomous, naturally irradiated outcroppings heavily hidden in the Australian outback. 7. Kakadu. Let's talk about the highly jagged, sun-blasted sandstone escarpments heavily dominating the massive, unforgiving wilderness of the Northern Territory in Australia. This harsh, completely brutal landscape was violently and aggressively lifted from the ancient seabed, creating incredibly deep gorges and razor-sharp, towering cliffs. Over thousands of years, catastrophic, sweeping megafires and devastating, sudden flash floods routinely wiped out absolutely anything that couldn't climb high enough to escape. Ancient societies were constantly and brutally forced onto these highly treacherous ledges, often permanently trapped and slowly starved to death as the muddy floodwaters below violently swarmed with massive, man-eating saltwater crocodiles. When you carefully approach the main viewing galleries at Ubir or Nurlangi, the sheer scale of the art is entirely dizzying. The continuous, highly detailed panels of X-ray-style animal paintings endlessly stretch for staggering lengths roughly equivalent to an entire American football field. The colors are incredibly striking ochre yellows, violently bright whites, and deep, blood-like reds. The texture of the surrounding rock is dangerously and highly abrasive, feeling exactly like giant slabs of shattered glass completely fused with boiling hot sand. Every single edge of the stone shelter looks entirely sharp enough to slice straight through the thickest, heavy leather boots. Surprisingly, the power is its extreme, natural environmental toxicity and entirely flawless venomous camouflage. The endurance of this incredibly harsh place is legendary, surviving the worst extremes on Earth, but its true superpower is how it perfectly and seamlessly hides some of the most highly lethal creatures on the planet directly within the ancient artwork itself. The shelter isn't just beautifully painted, it is heavily and aggressively occupied. At first glance, the danger feels completely negligible and totally easily ignored. You might just feel a very slight, highly prickly sensation on the back of your neck, remarkably similar to a harmless mosquito brushing past you on a humid evening. But what it actually does is rapidly introduce highly lethal, unstoppable neurotoxins directly into your vulnerable bloodstream. The deep, dark cracks between the beautiful X-ray paintings are entirely crammed with highly aggressive, severely venomous spiders and incredibly deadly snakes that blend perfectly and invisibly with the ancient red ochre. Here is exactly how the landscape causes its fatal damage. The incredibly deadly death adders wait entirely invisibly on the red, sun-baked rock ledges. Massive funnel-web spiders easily spot the heavy vibrations of your hiking boots hitting the stone. As you lean in closely to deeply admire the intricate, painted bone structure on a barramundi fish, the completely hidden predators violently attack. They rapidly ambush your completely exposed hands and face with devastating speed. The highly lethal venom ruthlessly chases through your central nervous system at completely terrifying speeds, shutting down vital communication to your muscles. Humans quickly endure agonizing, full-body paralysis, highly immediate respiratory failure, and total, unstoppable organ shutdown while collapsed directly beneath the ancient. Beautiful art. One final fact that completely turns everything upside down is that the ancient artists actually painted the intricate skeletal structures of the animals to specifically warn future generations exactly where the lethal venom rapidly targets the internal body. The beautiful, highly complex art is literally a highly detailed medical diagram of exactly how you are going to quickly die. If you genuinely thought venomous, biting rock walls were the ultimate, inescapable nightmare, our final destination features screaming, violent desert winds and blinding, razor-sharp dust that will completely erase you from existence. 8. Tassili Eniger. Let's talk about the sprawling, completely alien-like sandstone plateaus violently rising out of the deadly, scorching Sahara Desert in southern Algeria. This terrifying, highly disorienting forest of stone was aggressively carved by catastrophic, violently sustained wind erosion after the entire region rapidly transformed from a highly lush paradise into a brutal, completely hyperarid wasteland. This sudden, deeply catastrophic desertification completely wiped out the ancient, highly pastoral societies that peacefully lived here, brutally baking their flowing rivers to dry dust and permanently burying their stone cities under thousands of feet of entirely unforgiving, suffocating sand. When you stare directly at the massive, eroded rock pillars, the sheer size is genuinely and deeply overwhelming. The massive sandstone towers completely dwarf you, standing as impossibly tall as a 10-story apartment building. The mysterious paintings themselves are heavily scattered across these massive, silent monoliths, featuring highly bizarre, massive humanoid figures with deeply unsettling round heads. The fading colors are heavily bleached reds and ghostly, highly transparent whites. The texture of the ancient rock is incredibly powdery and highly, terrifyingly unstable, aggressively crumbling into sharp, microscopic silica dust the very moment you dare to touch it. Surprisingly, the power is its entirely weaponized, highly destructive hypervelocity wind currents. The silent plateau possesses an ancient, highly stubborn endurance, surviving the absolute harshest desert on the entire Earth, but its true superpower is its highly terrifying ability to actively accelerate the ambient wind into a lethal, completely flesh-flaying sandblaster. The creeping danger starts out feeling incredibly mild and highly pleasant. It simply feels like a very warm, slightly stiff breeze at a tropical beach, playfully kicking up a little bit of soft sand against your exposed ankles. But what it actually does is entirely brutal. It rapidly and aggressively strips the vital moisture and eventually the skin entirely off your exposed bones. The plateau's completely unique, twisting canyon shapes act exactly like a massive, highly pressurized wind tunnel, whipping the microscopic, razor-sharp silica sand into highly violent, completely inescapable vortexes. This is exactly how the desert actively inflicts its highly devastating damage. The screaming, high-speed wind waits patiently for the ambient temperature to rapidly drop at dusk. Then, the highly violent sandstorms aggressively ambush the entire stone plateau without warning. The millions of razor-sharp silica particles violently attack your entirely exposed skin, your vulnerable eyes, and your burning throat. The highly blinding, suffocating dust aggressively chases you through the confusing, twisting maze of rock pillars until you are completely, hopelessly lost. Humans brutally endure horrific, rapid dehydration, severe, bleeding lacerations from the highly accelerated high-speed sand, and eventual, highly terrifying burial alive beneath the rapidly shifting dunes while the bizarre, completely alien-like painted figures silently stare down at them. One final fact that completely turns everything upside down is that the massive, highly unsettling round-headed figures painted on the high rocks precisely and perfectly mimic the heavy visual distortion actively caused by severe, undulating heat mirages. The ancient art completely and mercilessly plays on your severe heat-induced delirium, making it look exactly like the towering, painted giants are physically detaching from the rock and walking directly toward you through the lethal, blinding sandstorm. We have reached the end of our journey exploring all creepy cave paintings that could kill you explained. The secret question is, which cave system uses its porous limestone rock to completely absorb the sound of its own collapsing ceiling? Leave your answers in the comments section. Thank you for exploring with me. Stay curious and watch your step.